Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to make a baby quilt inspired by another YouTuber, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle and today we are going to make a pixie sticks quilt. I have never made one of these before, but I recently saw Misty from Missouri Star Quilts make one and I'm completely inspired. So let's dive in. For this Missouri Star Quilts inspired project, I'm going to do the Pixie sticks. This was a triple play just a few weeks ago, and I loved it. I'd never seen it before, and it was inspiring, as you'll see. So I went to Sue's bin of fabric and I found these six. And I'm thinking for a baby quilt that it's going to be 12 blocks total. So 3 across by 4 down. So I need 12, which means I need 2 out of each of these. And then I found a small piece of white to make the little pixie sticks with. So I think this is going to work out incredibly well. I've laid them all out. I have to press them all, but I wanted to see what was my smallest piece of fabric, and that's the orange. It's the smallest. So I've been measuring it and thinking, and it is pretty much 17 and 3/4 by about 20 and a half inches. So I've double checked the measurements across because you can see the blue. Maybe you can't see the blue. The blue here is actually wider than it is taller. But anyway, I've measured them all and I've come up with the realization that I can get 2 pieces out of each fabric that have 10 inches as one dimension, as one of their dimensions. So do I do 10-inch squares, or like Misty does in the triple play, do I make them rectangles? And I think that's what I'm going to do because that's going to give me a little bit of extra width for a baby quilt. If I just do 10-inch blocks, by the time I add the pixie sticks and trim them down, they're probably going to end up at about 10 inches. And that's only about 30 inches across. And it'd be nice to be just a little bit wider than that by about 40 inches down if I keep them at 10. So I think I'm going to cut these at 13. 13 by 10 will be my starting rectangles. And then we'll slice them and make the pixie sticks into the blocks. So I'm going to press all of these and get them cut, and then probably refer back to the video again just for a little bit more inspiration, and then get started. I have cut my 6 fabrics into 2 blocks each, so 12 blocks in total, and they are 10 inches by 13 inches. And I've also looked around for the white that I want to use as the pixie sticks, and I found these pieces. Now I think there's probably enough here for 9 blocks rather than the full 12. But Sue has given me this fabulous jelly roll pack of white. So I think I'm going to use the extra that I need for this project from the roll. One of these is 2.5, so I'll have to trim it down. In the video, Misty uses 2.5 inch, but I think because I've sized down the blocks, I want to size down the strips as well. I debated between starting at 1.5 or 2 inches. If I use 1.5, it'll finish at 1 inch. If I use 2 inches, it'll finish at 1.5. These are already, except for one, already cut at 2 inches. So instead of wasting fabric, I think I'm just gonna use the 2 inches. And so to get started, it's actually pretty simple. I'm only gonna do one at a time because this is the first time for me making these blocks, but what we need to do is just slice this. Just randomly slice it. And that's it's a bit brave, but I kind of think I need to explore some more of this creative improvisation. So let's call that a good place to start. I'm just gonna slice this through here, and I'm gonna take it over to the sewing machine now and sew in a strip of white, make it look a little bit like a wonky scuba flag. But we're going to sew this first strip and then we're going to cross cut it again to sew in the second strip. So I'm going to try this one and then hopefully the other 11 will be quick and easy. And step 1, I've already got a problem. So this is why I do one block first, because it's important to find these things out early and not after having done 12 full blocks. So I sewed my piece, easy enough. And then when I got here, I knew that I needed it to be a little longer than my red piece so that when I fold it over, that because it's on an angle, I want to make sure I have enough. So I cut it off down here thinking that would be plenty. But I've cut it at the wrong angle because let me show you what happens. And I only realized it as I unfolded it to start to iron it. And can you see how that point has gone up this way? And so with, I don't have a ruler handy. Here's my big giant ruler. The white piece is now too short. Can you see that? So I have cut that wrong. We're not going to throw it out. I'm just going to make sure I do a smaller pixie stick somewhere else, but I am going to actually take this off and try again. Here we go. Attempt number 2, looking much better than attempt number 1. So you can see I have enough that I could cut that off straight and I could cut this off straight if I needed to. So good lesson, be very careful and test these things. I still have the piece here and I will hopefully be able to use it in a shorter cut on another piece. So the next step is to line this up. Everything is going to be squared up at the end. So I'm just going to eyeball where this sort of looks like it makes sense to add it, flip it over and sew it. That's looking great. It's the first half of the first block. I have, of course, pressed my seams open. And now I need to decide where to cut it for the second cut. I'm more of an organized person, so I'm not sure where to cut it. Do I cut it? I cut it like that? That's gonna make it look very X-y. So maybe down here? This is harder than I thought it was gonna be, but yeah, let's go through here. Why not? So I'm gonna cut it this way. And now Misty offered an amazing tip. Oh, it's the tip to put these pieces together so that these seams line up, but I can sew this piece first, and I wonder if my reject piece is going to be long enough, and it doesn't, well, maybe. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can squish it in. So hopefully that will work. I'm gonna go sew the first part, and then I will show you Misty's tip, or you can go check the Missouri Star Quilt Company video for how to make sure that these get lined up. And this poor piece, I think it's gonna get ripped out the second time because I have sewn it on, but can you see here? I've got probably almost a ½ inch, definitely a solid ¼ inch that is just too short. So for the second time, I'm going to rip this poor piece off and find a longer one. So what have we learned so far? Don't use pieces that are too small, meaning cut pieces bigger than you think you need them to account for these angles. So twice now I've used a piece that's too short, but I'm learning. So Misty offers a great tip because what you want to make sure that you do is get these lined up again when you sew this piece back onto here. It would look a little odd if this were off a little bit because then your line doesn't, you lose the illusion of your sticks crossing. So she had a great tip. She folded this in half, and I'm going to use my seams as my guide, and just finger pressed this little spot right here. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this on camera, but that little finger pressed mark is pretty clear to me. And then do the same thing here. Fold this over and use the seams to be able to tell if it's lined up. So this is a great tip in principle. In theory, let's see if we can make it happen in reality. This is maybe a tiny bit harder than I thought it was going to be, but oh, here we go. This works. See, I'm peeling it back so I can see where my pieces line up perfectly, like this. So that's good. And I'm just going to put another finger press here. And now I'll be able to line up. Now, if I were super smart, I would fold this one the other way so that I have a hill going into a valley, which will actually make it even easier to line them up. There we go. So now these points, this point is my valley and this point is my hill. And now when I flip these over, I can line up my hill and valley. I'll probably put a clip on that and then sew it down. So this is the first block. And yeah, I'm not really sure. It looks a little strange to me, maybe. I will, of course, have to square it up. You can see how things have gotten a little bit wonky by adding the pixie sticks into it. But now I'm rethinking my decision to make these the 2-inch strips to finish at 1.5. It looks a bit chunky and not in a good way. So I think what I'm going to do is set this one aside, and I'm going to make the next one with 1.5-inch strips so that these finish at 1 inch, and see if I like that better. So that means in the end, one block will have to be completely taken apart so it matches all the others, but I feel strongly enough about this one that I think I'm willing to try a different approach and then make a decision. So I'm going to use the other red one. I'm going to find some 1.5-inch strips, which will finish at 2 inch, which will finish at 1 inch in the final. Make the other red one, and then we'll compare and contrast and see where we land. I've just finished the second block, and I think the decision is clear. This is with 1.5-inch strips, so those finish at 1 inch, and this is with the 2-inch strips. And I think I really like this one better. So this first test block is going to get taken apart again, and I'm going to replace these strips with the 1.5-inch strips. I'm glad I did the test. I'm glad I paused because this first one just didn't sit right looking at it. It looked a little too clunky and unbalanced, but then putting in the thinner strips, I think it has more of a delicacy that I'm hoping for with these little cross sticks. So I'm going to continue on this way, take this one apart, and make the rest of the blocks. So I'm partway through the last block, and I thought I would share with you a few things that I've learned along the way. So number one, I think that I have to get better at being random. I find that the ones that are probably a little more balanced to be my least favorite blocks in the collection of 12 that I've made. The ones that are extremely offset are my favorites. This one I think might be my favorite block out of all. This one also quite offset, really like it. This one also really offset. Some of the others, like the first red one that I did and then redid, very much like the purple one, this X kind of in the middle just isn't my favorite. So you might want to think about that if you give this a try. Offset all of your crosses to an extreme that might look a little weird when you're first doing it. The other thing I've learned, and I was trying to do it with this block, as I was trimming some of my pieces, I had pieces like this left over, and I didn't want to sew them together so that I'd have a seam in the middle. And maybe I would have if I was really short on fabric, but what I was trying to do was cut the block in 4 and then use these pieces separately here and here. That worked, and in fact that's how I did this block, but it was also a challenge because of the sharp angles to get things lined up properly. So I found that I sewed the piece but then had to recut the angle in order to make it work. So if you're a beginner, definitely just use the 2 long strips. That's the easiest. If you are much more of a confident and experienced sewer or quilter, give give it a try. You have to cut your block in 4 first, and then you can sew your shorter pieces, but it was a lot harder than I thought it would be. The other thing I've learned is that matching these up in order to get them, lining them up like where to sew, is a little harder than I thought it would be. Because of the angles and because of the seam allowances, it is actually harder than I thought it would be to figure out how to line it up so that it sews together without wasting too much off of one end or the other. So I'm going to finish sewing this last one together, and maybe I'll cut it all the way over here like this. Because like I said, the ones that are really exaggerated tend to be my favorite blocks. So I'm going to sew this last one, and then I'm going to dive into trimming. I haven't started that yet. Let me show you what I mean about lining these up. So I'm going to fold this one in half like this to get a valley. And maybe I'll zoom you in so you can see a little bit more closely. I'm just folding this over until these points match so that I know where the center is. And so that's going to create a little valley. And then on this one, I'm going to fold them this way so that I get a little mountain. And earlier, I was folding them so that these seams line up, but I wasn't paying much attention to the angle of the cut. I have found it easier to pay attention to both, to line up these seam allowances and also along the line of the cut. So the more extreme the cut, you may have an instance where your fold looks something like that, with these lined up, of course. But that's okay. That's part of how you can sort of angle your mark so that it helps you to line it up. This is not foolproof, but it's better than nothing. So now I have a little mountain and a little valley, and I'm going to lay them together. And again, I'm going to see if I can bring it up here so that you can sort of see it, see where my mountain and my valley meet. And what I'm going to do is grab a clip, and I'm going to clip it to sort of simulate a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to clip it like that. That sort of simulates a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I'm going to check. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave that. But I have had instances where I've done this and I've checked, and then I've just shoved it over a little bit one way or the other because it just didn't look lined up despite my best efforts. So that does look good, and I will take this over to the machine and give it a sew. And that's the last of the 12 blocks. So now I'm really interested to see how close or bigger than my original 10 by 13 I'm going to be able to cut these. Oh, see, that's really interesting. This is 14 across, but of course it's short here. So I may end up just going back down to 13, and then across in this direction, it's still about 10 inches. So I'm going to cautiously measure a whole bunch of my blocks because I don't want to cut them all to one size and then find one that doesn't fit. So I'm going to look at them all really closely, and I'll report back on the final size that I decide for these. I've gone through all my blocks and I have trimmed 2 sides. And for me right now, it's the top and the side. And you can see I got a little confused and turned around on 3 of them. So the rest of them are a long side and a short side in this orientation trimmed. And then there's 3 of them that, yeah, I got a little confused. So now I'm going to go through them all and measure them to see if I can find the biggest common size that I can cut out of all of these blocks. And then I'll trim off the other sides in order to do that. So for this red one, for example, if you look at it, I know that this and this are nice and even and square, but look at this, there's a huge amount here. So I need to measure this distance and then this distance to understand the biggest size I can cut out of this block. And I'll do that for all of them so that I understand what I'm headed to. Here are all the blocks laid out on the floor of my quilting room, and I like the layout, but I think I'm going to like it even better with 1.5 inch white sashing. That'll help me increase the size a little bit. It'll break it up. I squished them all together to see if I wanted to sew it all together just the way Misty did, and wasn't that excited about it. So I am going to put the sashing in, and then that'll give me an opportunity to put a little bit of white around the outside edge as a little border, and then a nice bright colorful binding, I think, to finish it all off. And so this is the final quilt top. I'm really, really thrilled with it. I think the sashing and the borders make all the difference. And I'll put some photos in here of the finished quilt, even though it's just hanging up here behind me. I hope you enjoyed this. It's a little improvisational. It's a little outside of some of our comfort zones, but it was a lot of fun. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.